Captain Sarah Chen pressed her face against the viewport of the exploration vessel Meridian, watching the dying planet grow larger on the screen. Kepler 442c had once been a thriving world, but the red giant star it orbited was consuming everything in its path. The evacuation ships had left weeks ago, taking the last of the Zephyrian refugees to safety. "Captain, we're picking up life signs," reported Lieutenant Morrison from his station. "Sector 7, near what used to be their capital city." Sarah frowned. "That's impossible. The atmospheric readings show toxic levels of radiation. Nothing could survive down there. The readings are faint but definitely organic. Multiple signatures, small in size. Against protocol, Sarah made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. "Prep the shuttle. We're going down." Dr. Elena Vasquez, the ship's xenobiologist, joined the rescue team. As their shuttle descended through the orange-tinted atmosphere, the devastation became clear. Crystalline spires that once reached toward the sky lay shattered like broken glass. The elegant bridges that connected Zephyrian cities had melted into twisted metal sculptures. They found them in what had been a nursery compound. 5 Zephyrian cubs, no bigger than human toddlers, huddled together in a lead-lined shelter. Their silver fur was matted and dirty, their large violet eyes filled with terror and confusion. The adult Zephyrians who should have been caring for them were nowhere to be found. "Their parents?" Dr. Vasquez whispered, checking her scanner. "I'm reading traces of disintegrated organic matter. The radiation surge must have happened too fast for them to reach the shelter." The cubs trembled as the humans approached. Zephyrians were known throughout the galaxy as the ultimate warriors, standing 8 feet tall when fully grown, with reflexes faster than any other known species. Their military prowess was legendary, their combat skills unmatched. But these 5 looked nothing like the feared soldiers the galaxy knew. They were just frightened children, abandoned and alone. Sarah knelt down slowly, removing her helmet despite the radiation warnings on her suit. "It's okay," she said softly. "We're here to help." The largest cub, barely the size of a human 5-year-old, stepped forward. His silver fur had patches of gold that marked him as potential pack leader. He sniffed the air, processing the human scent with the sophisticated olfactory system his species was famous for. "Can we even help them?" Morrison asked over the comm. "I mean, they're Zephyrians. Don't they need specific conditions to survive?" Dr. Vasquez was already running calculations on her portable lab unit. "Their basic biology is compatible with human environments. They'll need some dietary supplements and temperature adjustments, but it's possible. The question is whether Command will approve it." Sarah was still locked in a staring contest with the golden-patched cub. Something passed between them. A moment of understanding that transcended species barriers. The cub's violet eyes seemed to say, "Please don't leave us here to die." "Command can disapprove all they want," Sarah said firmly. "I'm not leaving children to die no matter what species they are." The rescue took 3 hours. The cubs were weak from hunger and radiation exposure, but alive. Dr. Vasquez worked frantically to create a suitable environment in the ship's medical bay, while Sarah personally carried each cub to safety. They weighed almost nothing, their hollow bones designed for the high-gravity world they'd never see again. As the Meridian lifted off from the dying planet, Sarah watched Kepler 442c shrink in the viewport. The star's expansion would consume the world completely within days. They had saved 5 lives from an entire civilization. "What do we do with them now?" Morrison asked. "The Zephyrian evacuation fleets are weeks away. These cubs need immediate care." Dr. Vasquez looked up from her readings. "According to their physiological data, they're extremely young. In human terms, they'd be equivalent to 6-month-old infants. They need constant care, specialized nutrition, and emotional bonding to survive." "Emotional bonding? Zephyrians are pack animals, Captain. Without a pack structure, cubs this young typically die within days, even if their physical needs are met. They need someone to imprint on, someone to become their surrogate pack." Sarah looked at her small crew. They were explorers, not parents. But something in those violet eyes had touched her heart in a way she couldn't explain. "Then that's what we'll give them." The decision to raise the cubs themselves wasn't made lightly. Command wanted to transfer them to a xenobiology research station, but Sarah fought the order. She argued that the cubs needed stability, not to be passed from facility to facility like specimens. Over the following weeks, the crew of the Meridian learned to care for their unusual passengers. The cubs, who they named using human names at Sarah's insistence, began to thrive. Marcus, the golden-patched leader, attached himself to Sarah with fierce loyalty. The twins, Alex and Adrian, bonded with Morrison and Dr. Vasquez respectively. Elena, the only female cub, formed a connection with the ship's engineer, Tom Riley. The smallest, David, seemed to love everyone equally. The cubs learned human customs and language with startling speed. Zephyrian intelligence was known to be superior to human average, but watching infant minds absorb information was remarkable. Within a month, they were communicating in broken English. Within 3 months, they were helping with simple ship tasks. They're not pets, Sarah often reminded her crew. They're refugees who will someday need to rejoin their own people. But as the cubs grew, it became harder to remember they weren't human children. They played human games, laughed at human jokes, and cried when separated from their adoptive family. The galaxy's most fearsome warriors were learning to be human in all but biology. The transformation was remarkable to watch. What should have been a temporary rescue mission had become something much more profound. 5 orphaned aliens were learning that family wasn't about species or biology, but about love, protection, and belonging. None of them could have predicted how important this lesson would become for the future of humanity itself. 2 years had passed since the rescue, and the Meridian had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a mixed-species family vessel. The 5 Zephyrian cubs had grown rapidly, now standing 4 feet tall and showing the first signs of their species' natural athletic abilities. Marcus had appointed himself protector of the ship, following Captain Chen everywhere she went. His golden patches had spread across his silver fur in intricate patterns that Dr. Vasquez documented with fascination. Zephyrian markings were supposed to indicate social rank and combat prowess, but Marcus's patterns were unlike anything in the xenobiological databases. "Captain Sarah," Marcus said one morning, his English now fluent despite the slight growl his vocal cords produced, "I have been thinking about the navigation protocols you showed me yesterday." Sarah looked up from her coffee, smiling at the sight of the young Zephyrian in a modified jumpsuit. The crew had learned to adapt human clothing for their guests' unique physiology. "What about them?" "The mathematical sequences you use for hyperspace calculations. They are inefficient. My people developed faster methods." This had become a common occurrence. As the cubs matured, their natural Zephyrian abilities began to emerge. Their enhanced reflexes made them excellent pilots. Their analytical minds could process complex calculations faster than the ship's computers. Their heightened senses allowed them to detect problems with ship systems before the monitoring equipment registered them. But it was their adaptation of human customs that truly amazed the crew. "Uncle Tom, you are doing the engine calibration wrong," David announced, scrambling up into the engineering section on all fours. Despite being the smallest of the 5, he had developed an intuitive understanding of mechanical systems that impressed even the veteran engineer. Tom Riley laughed, ruffling the cub's silver fur. "Oh, really? And how would you do it? Watch." David's small hands moved with precision over the control panel, adjusting settings with the confidence of someone twice his age. The engine's humming immediately became smoother, more efficient. "I'll be damned," Tom muttered. "Where did you learn that?" "I watched you. But I also listened to the engine's song. It told me what it needed." The cubs had begun combining human knowledge with their natural Zephyrian instincts, creating new ways of thinking that surprised everyone. Elena, the only female, had taken to helping Dr. Vasquez with research, but she approached scientific problems with a creativity that purely human or purely Zephyrian minds might not achieve. "Look at this data pattern," Elena said, pointing to the holographic display with one clawed finger. "You see disease progression, but I see pack behavior. The virus spreads like a hunting formation." Dr. Vasquez studied the display with new eyes. Elena was right. By viewing the pathogen as following pack instincts rather than simple biological imperatives, entirely new treatment approaches became possible. The twins, Alex and Adrian, had developed an almost telepathic connection that allowed them to coordinate complex tasks without verbal communication. They spent their days with Lieutenant Morrison, learning about security protocols and ship defense systems. "It's not telepathy," Adrian explained when Morrison asked about their synchronization. "We feel each other's heartbeats. Zephyrians in a pack always know where their packmates are. But you're not in a pack," Morrison pointed out. "You're with humans. Alex tilted his head, violet eyes thoughtful. We are in a pack. You are our pack now. These moments reminded the crew that despite their human upbringing, the cubs retained core Zephyrian traits. They had excellent night vision and could see in spectrums humans couldn't access. Their hearing could detect sounds through ship bulkheads. Most remarkably, they seemed to sense emotions with uncanny accuracy. When Dr. Vasquez received news that her father had passed away on Earth, she tried to hide her grief and continue working. But Elena appeared at her side within minutes, placing a gentle paw on her arm. You smell sad, Elena said simply. In Zephyrian packs, when one mourns, all mourn together. You do not have to be alone. The comfort they provided wasn't just emotional. As the cubs grew stronger and more skilled, they began contributing to ship operations in ways that improved efficiency dramatically. Their enhanced senses allowed them to detect asteroid fields and spatial anomalies long before sensors registered them. Their analytical abilities helped solve navigation problems that would have taken human crews hours to work through. But perhaps most importantly, they brought a sense of family to what had been a purely professional crew. Time for lessons, Captain Chen announced one evening. As she had every day for 2 years, the cubs gathered in the common area, eager to learn. Sarah had taken it upon herself to teach them about human history, culture, and ethics. Tonight's lesson was about the concept of sacrifice. During Earth's World War II, Sarah began, many humans made sacrifices to protect others. They gave up their own safety to save people they didn't even know. Marcus raised his hand, a gesture he'd learned from human customs. But why? If they did not know these people, why risk themselves? Because they believed it was right. Because they understood that sometimes the needs of many outweigh the needs of few. The cubs absorbed this lesson with the same intensity they brought to everything else. They asked questions about human moral philosophy, about concepts like duty, honor, and compassion that existed in Zephyrian culture but were expressed differently. In my species, Elena said thoughtfully, we protect the pack because the pack is everything. But humans protect strangers too. That seems bigger. Different doesn't mean better or worse, Sarah reminded them. Your people's loyalty to pack is a strength. Human willingness to help strangers is also a strength. Maybe you can find ways to combine both. As the months passed, the cubs developed their own unique moral code that blended human ethics with Zephyrian instincts. They were fiercely loyal to their adopted crew family, but they also showed compassion for other species they encountered during their travels. When the Meridian responded to a distress call from a Altarian merchant vessel, the cubs insisted on helping with the rescue despite the potential danger. They used their enhanced abilities to locate survivors in damaged ship sections where human rescuers couldn't safely go. They're becoming something new, Dr. Vasquez observed later. Not fully human, not fully Zephyrian, but something that combines the best of both. Captain Chen nodded, watching Marcus demonstrate a new defensive technique he'd developed by combining human martial arts with Zephyrian combat instincts. I just hope their own people will accept them when the time comes. None of them realized that this unique blend of cultures and values was preparing the cubs for a destiny that would test everything they'd learned about sacrifice, loyalty, and protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. 5 years after the rescue, the day Captain Chen had always dreaded finally arrived. A massive Zephyrian fleet appeared on the edge of their sector, broadcasting identification codes that matched the cubs' genetic markers. The survivors of Kepler 442c had come to reclaim their lost children. Marcus stood 7 feet tall now, his golden markings fully developed into patterns that Dr. Vasquez had never seen in any database. His violet eyes held intelligence and compassion that seemed to reflect both species that had shaped him. When the communication came through, he translated the formal Zephyrian military language for his human family. They're requesting immediate transfer of the 5 juveniles recovered from the dead world, Marcus said, his voice carefully controlled. They say we've been cared for by humans and they're grateful, but it's time for us to join our true pack. The twins, Alex and Adrian, now stood 6.5 feet tall and moved with the fluid grace their species was famous for. They exchanged one of their wordless communications before Adrian spoke. They don't understand, he said quietly. They think we were just surviving here. They don't know we were living. Elena, who had grown into an elegant warrior scientist, was analyzing data on her portable scanner. The fleet consists of 12 battlecruisers and multiple support vessels. They have enough firepower to level a small moon. They're not making a request, are they? Sarah felt her heart breaking. She had always known this day would come, but knowing and experiencing were different things. These weren't the frightened cubs she'd rescued anymore. They were young adults with the characteristic Zephyrian strength and intelligence, but they were also her children in every way that mattered. "You have to go," she said, though the words felt like swallowing glass. "Your people need you. You belong with them." "Do we?" David asked. Despite being the smallest, he had grown into the most thoughtful of the five. "We've been analyzing the cultural data in the messages they've sent. Current Zephyrian society is very different from what we've learned here." The truth was uncomfortable but undeniable. The cubs had been raised with human values of individual choice, creative problem-solving, and compassion for other species. But the Zephyrians who had survived their world's destruction had become more militant, more insular. The trauma of losing their planet had hardened them into a warrior culture, with little tolerance for outsiders. When the Zephyrian delegation boarded the Meridian, the cultural clash was immediately apparent. Commander Thaktor, a massive warrior with scars covering his silver fur, looked at the five young Zephyrians with obvious disapproval. "You've been contaminated," he growled in perfect English, his voice carrying the authority of absolute command. "Human sense, human mannerisms, human weakness. This will require extensive reconditioning." Marcus stepped forward, and Sarah recognized the protective stance he'd learned from watching her command the ship. "Respectfully, Commander, we prefer the term educated. These humans saved our lives and raised us with honor." "Honor?" Thaktor's laugh was harsh. "Humans have no concept of honor. They're weak omnivores who've barely managed to leave their home system. True strength comes from purity of purpose, not from mixing with inferior species." The insult to their adoptive family triggered responses in all five cubs simultaneously. Elena's scientific scanner became a weapon in her hands. The twins moved into a protective formation they'd never been taught, but seemed to know instinctively. David positioned himself to protect Dr. Vasquez, and Marcus placed himself directly between Thaktor and Captain Chen. "These humans are our pack," Marcus said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "You will show them respect." "Your pack?" Thaktor seemed genuinely confused by the concept. "These creatures cannot be pack. They're not Zephyrian. They're not even suitable as servants." Sarah stepped forward, hoping to defuse the situation. "Commander, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We never tried to replace their connection to your people. We simply provided care until you could be reunited." "Reunited implies we were ever together," Thaktor replied coldly. "These juveniles were genetic material from our home world. Now they are assets to be recovered and properly trained. The corruption you've introduced will be removed." "Corruption?" Elena's voice was dangerously quiet. "Is that what you call learning to value life? Learning to solve problems through cooperation rather than domination? Learning to see other species as potential allies rather than enemies?" The confrontation revealed the depth of the philosophical divide. The surviving Zephyrians had developed a rigid military hierarchy, focused on racial purity and conquest. They viewed other species as either potential threats or resources to be exploited. The concept of genuine friendship or alliance with non-Zephyrians was incomprehensible to them. But the cubs had learned different values. They had seen humans sacrifice their own comfort to care for orphaned aliens. They had witnessed cooperation between species that produced better results than either could achieve alone. They had experienced unconditional love that crossed biological boundaries. The debate continued for hours, with Thaktor becoming increasingly frustrated by the cubs' contaminated thinking. Finally, he played his ultimate card. "You have a choice," he told them. "Come with us and undergo reconditioning to remove human influences, or be declared dead to our people. There is no third option." Sarah watched the five young Zephyrians she had raised struggle with an impossible decision: stay with the humans who loved them but remain forever exiled from their own species, or join their people but lose everything that made them who they were. "We need time to decide," Marcus said finally. "You have until tomorrow," Thaktor replied. "Then we leave, with or without you." That night, the crew of the Meridian gathered in the common area, where so many lessons and family meals had taken place. The weight of the decision hung heavy in the air. "We have to go," Elena said softly. "If we don't, we'll always wonder what we could have contributed to our people. Maybe we can help them understand what we've learned here." Alex and Adrian nodded in unison. Our people are traumatized, Adrian explained. They've lost their home, their culture, everything that defined them. Maybe we can help them heal. David looked at Tom Riley, his adoptive uncle. You taught me that family isn't about blood, it's about choice. We're choosing to try to save our birth family, even if it means leaving our chosen family. Marcus turned to Captain Chen, his violet eyes bright with unshed tears. You taught us about sacrifice, about putting the needs of many above the needs of few. Our people need us even if they don't understand what they need. Sarah nodded, though her heart was breaking. We always knew this day would come. You've grown into remarkable individuals. Whatever happens, never forget what you've learned about compassion and cooperation. The next morning, the 5 young Zephyrians boarded the shuttle that would take them to the fleet. Each carried a small personal item from their human family, hidden where Thakator wouldn't see it. They also carried something more valuable, a set of principles and values that would prove crucial to the survival of both species. As the shuttle departed, Sarah watched through the viewport until it disappeared among the massive Zephyrian ships. She had no way of knowing that this painful separation was actually the first step toward the most important alliance in galactic history. The young Zephyrians who had learned humanity's greatest lessons were about to discover that their birth people needed those lessons more than anyone could have imagined. 3 years had passed since the painful departure of the Zephyrian cubs from the Meridian. Captain Sarah Chen, now Admiral Chen, stood in the emergency command center on Luna Station, watching the tactical displays with growing dread. The invasion fleet approaching Earth was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. The Devourers, as they called themselves, were a machine-biological hybrid race that consumed entire worlds for resources. They had appeared at the edge of human space 6 months ago, systematically destroying every colony and outpost in their path. Their technology was far beyond anything humans possessed, and their appetite for destruction seemed limitless. Status report, Sarah commanded, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her stomach. Commander Morrison, now serving as her tactical advisor, highlighted sections of the holographic display. The outer defense grid is completely gone. Mars base fell yesterday. The Devourers stripped the entire planet of metal and organic compounds in less than 12 hours. Dr. Vasquez, now the director of xenobiological defense, pulled up biological scans of the enemy. They're not just machines or just biological entities. They're something that merges both into a perfect killing system. Our weapons barely scratch their hulls and they adapt to every strategy we've tried. The situation was desperate. Humanity's greatest scientists and military minds had worked around the clock for months, but nothing they developed could slow the Devourer advance. The enemy ships were living entities that could heal damage, evolve new defenses, and reproduce themselves by consuming matter from destroyed worlds. How long until they reach Earth? Sarah asked. 18 hours, Morrison replied grimly. Maybe 20 if we throw everything we have at them in one final defensive action. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering the faces of the 5 Zephyrian cubs she had raised. They would be adults now, probably serving in their people's military forces. She wondered if they remembered the lessons about sacrifice and protecting others that she had taught them so many years ago. The briefing continued with increasingly bleak reports. The Jovian defense fleet had been obliterated trying to buy time for Earth's evacuation, but there was nowhere to evacuate to. The Devourers moved faster than human ships, and they had already consumed or blocked every possible escape route. Tom Riley, now Chief of Engineering for the Defense Fleet, presented the final option available to them. We've got one shot, he said, calling up technical schematics. We detonate the fusion cores of every ship in the fleet simultaneously, right in the heart of their formation. The energy release might be enough to damage their main vessels. It's a suicide mission, Dr. Vasquez observed quietly. It's the only mission left, Sarah replied. How many ships do we have operational? 237, Morrison answered, including the Meridian. Sarah felt a pang at the mention of her old ship. The vessel where she had raised 5 alien children was now one of the last hopes for humanity's survival. Casualties? Total, Tom said simply. Every crew member on every ship. We're talking about the complete destruction of humanity's space fleet. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Even if the desperate plan worked, humanity would be left defenseless. If it failed, the human species would be extinct within a day. There has to be another way, Elena Vasquez said, though her voice lacked conviction. Some strategy we haven't considered. Sarah pulled up the long-range scanner data, studying the Devourer fleet composition. The enemy had learned from every encounter, adapting their tactics and defenses to counter human strategies. They had biological sensors that could detect human thoughts, energy shields that absorbed conventional weapons, and reproductive capabilities that turned every victory into a temporary setback. "Sir," a communications officer called out, "we're receiving evacuation requests from the outer settlements. 3 million people on the agricultural worlds, 2 million in the asteroid mining facilities." "Tell them," Sarah started, then stopped. What could she tell them? That humanity's entire space fleet couldn't protect them? That they should make peace with their deaths? "Tell them we're coming," she said finally. Tell them to hold on. But even as she gave the order, Sarah knew it was a lie. The defense fleet couldn't reach the settlements in time, and even if they could, they lacked the firepower to make a difference. The Devourers would consume those 6 million people just as they had consumed Mars, stripping away every trace of life and leaving behind only empty space. The tactical analysis continued through the night, but no new solutions emerged. Human technology, human strategy, and human courage weren't enough to face this threat. The Devourers had conquered thousands of worlds across the galaxy. They had faced every type of defensive strategy imaginable and overcome them all. Dr. Vasquez presented her final biological analysis of the enemy. "They're essentially perfect predators," she explained. "They combine the adaptability of organic life with the precision of machines. They learn from every encounter and share that knowledge across their entire fleet instantly." "What about their weaknesses?" Morrison asked. "They don't seem to have any. At least, none that we can exploit with our current capabilities." Sarah studied the enemy fleet movements, looking for patterns or vulnerabilities that her experienced military mind might detect. But the Devourers moved with ruthless efficiency, protecting their larger vessels with smaller scouts, rotating their formations to prevent concentrated attacks, and maintaining communication networks that allowed instant coordination across their entire force. "There's something else," Dr. Vasquez added reluctantly. "According to the data we've gathered, this isn't even their main fleet. This is just a scouting force. If they succeed in consuming our worlds, they'll call in reinforcements that could devour the entire sector." The implications were staggering. Humanity wasn't just facing extinction. They were facing the complete erasure of all life in their part of the galaxy. Every species, every world, every trace of civilization would be consumed to feed the Devourers' endless hunger. "Admiral," the communications officer called again. "Long-range sensors are detecting movement in the outer system. Unknown ship's configuration doesn't match Devourer signatures." Sarah's heart leaped with hope. "Reinforcements? Did the Centauri colonies send help?" "Negative, sir. These ships, they're not human design. Actually, they're not in our databases at all." The tactical display updated to show the new arrivals. 12 massive vessels had appeared at the edge of the solar system, moving with the fluid grace that Sarah remembered from old memories. The hull configurations were elegant and deadly, featuring the sweeping curves and crystalline armor that could only belong to one species. "Zephyrian battle cruisers," Morrison breathed. "It's a full warpack." Sarah's mind raced. The Zephyrians were the galaxy's greatest warriors, but they had shown no interest in helping other species. Their isolationist policies had been strengthened after the loss of their homeworld. They fought only for themselves and their own interests, unless— "Open a channel," Sarah ordered. "All frequencies." The communication array reached out across space, carrying humanity's desperate plea to ships that might represent salvation or simply another threat. But as Sarah waited for a response, she couldn't shake the feeling that those ships had come for a reason that had nothing to do with politics or military alliances. In the depths of space, 5 individuals who had once been rescued cubs prepared to repay a debt that had been growing in their hearts for 8 long years. The lessons they had learned about sacrifice, compassion, and protecting the weak were about to be tested in the ultimate crucible of war. The voice that came through the communications array sent shockwaves through the Luna Station Command Center. It was deeper than Sarah remembered, carrying the natural authority of a Zephyrian military commander, but the accent and speaking patterns were unmistakably familiar. "Admiral Chen, this is Fleet Commander Marcus of the Zephyrian Liberation Force. We're here to help." Sarah's legs nearly gave out. The last time she had heard that voice, it had belonged to a 7-foot-tall young adult saying goodbye with tears in his violet eyes. Now it carried the confidence of a seasoned military leader, but she could still hear echoes of the frightened cub she had once comforted during thunderstorms aboard the Meridian. "Marcus?" she whispered, then caught herself and spoke clearly into the comm. "Fleet Commander, this is Admiral Chen. We're facing an enemy unlike anything we've encountered before." "We know about the Devourers, Captain Sarah. We've been tracking their movement for months. Elena has been analyzing their biological patterns while Alex and Adrian developed new tactical approaches. David has been working on technological countermeasures." The casual mention of the other cubs sent waves of emotion through the command staff. Dr. Vasquez pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Morrison gripped his console so tightly his knuckles went white. They were all remembering 5 alien children learning to be human, never imagining those lessons would one day save their species. "How are you here?" Sarah asked. "The last we heard, your people had become increasingly isolationist." "That's a long story," Marcus replied, and Sarah could hear both sadness and determination in his voice. "One that begins with 5 young Zephyrians who refused to let their adoptive family forget the lessons you taught us." The tactical display updated as the Zephyrian fleet moved into formation around Earth's defensive perimeter. But these weren't the rigid military formations that Zephyrian doctrine typically employed. The ships moved with fluid coordination that seemed to blend Zephyrian pack instincts with something else entirely. "Permission to dock at Luna Station," Marcus requested. "We need to coordinate our efforts if we're going to save your people." 20 minutes later, Sarah stood in the docking bay watching a familiar figure stride down the shuttle ramp. Marcus had grown into a magnificent specimen of his species, standing 8 feet tall with golden markings that had expanded into intricate patterns across his silver fur. But when their eyes met, she saw the same compassionate intelligence that had always defined him. Behind him came the others. Elena had become an elegant warrior scientist, her movements precise and graceful. The twins, Alex and Adrian, moved in perfect synchronization, their bond stronger than ever. David, still the smallest but now a full 7 feet tall, carried himself with quiet confidence. But what shocked Sarah most was their uniforms. They wore Zephyrian military gear but modified with insignia she didn't recognize. The traditional pack symbols had been altered to include representations of multiple species working together. "Captain Sarah," Marcus said, using the title he had called her as a child. Without hesitation, he stepped forward and embraced her, a gesture that would have been unthinkable for traditional Zephyrians. "You've grown," Sarah managed to say, fighting back tears. "All of you." "We had good teachers," Elena replied, stepping forward to embrace Dr. Vasquez. "You taught us that family isn't about species or biology. That lesson changed everything." The reunion was interrupted by urgent tactical alerts. The Devourer fleet had accelerated their approach and would reach Earth's outer defenses in 6 hours instead of 18. But for the first time in months, Sarah felt hope rather than despair. "We need to talk strategy," she said, leading them to the command center. "What do you know about the Devourers that we don't?" "Quite a lot," David replied, activating a portable holographic projector. "We've been studying them for 3 years, ever since they consumed the Rigel colonies. Elena's biological analysis, combined with our technological research, has revealed something important. The hologram showed the internal structure of a Devourer ship, with organic and mechanical components integrated in ways that seemed impossible. But the display highlighted specific connection points where the two systems interfaced. They're not as perfectly integrated as they appear," Elena explained. "The biological and mechanical components communicate through quantum entanglement networks. But those networks have a vulnerability that only becomes apparent when you understand both Zephyrian pack psychology and human problem-solving approaches." Alex stepped forward, his tactical mind evident in his precise explanation. "Traditional military doctrine would attack the ships directly, but you taught us to think beyond conventional solutions. The key isn't destroying the ships, it's disrupting the communication between biological and mechanical components." Adrian continued seamlessly. "The disruption requires a specific frequency pattern that combines Zephyrian pack communication frequencies with human mathematical harmonics. Neither species could develop this solution alone." Sarah studied the data with growing amazement. This could work. But implementing it would require perfect coordination between our fleets. Zephyrian ships and human vessels working together as a single unit. Which brings us to the most important part of our story, Marcus said quietly. After we left you, we spent 3 years trying to convince our people that cooperation with other species wasn't weakness, but strength. It wasn't easy. The tale they told was both heartbreaking and inspiring. The 5 cubs had faced suspicion, hostility, and attempts at forced reconditioning. But they had persisted, demonstrating again and again that their hybrid approach to problems produced better results than traditional Zephyrian methods. Elena's research saved an entire colony world when traditional Zephyrian medicine failed, Marcus explained. Her approach, combining human creativity with Zephyrian analytical precision, found solutions that neither species could discover alone. David's engineering innovations improved our ship designs by 40%, Elena added. Alex and Adrian developed new tactical formations that made our fleets more effective than they'd been in generations. And what about you? Sarah asked Marcus. He smiled, an expression that looked strange on Zephyrian features but somehow perfectly natural on his. I became a teacher. I spent 2 years traveling to every Zephyrian settlement, sharing the lessons you taught me about sacrifice, compassion, and protecting those who can't protect themselves. The transformation hadn't been complete or easy. Many Zephyrians still believed in racial purity and isolationist policies, but a significant faction had embraced the new philosophy, forming the liberation force that had come to Earth's aid. We couldn't save your people just by arriving, Marcus continued. We needed to change our own people first, show them that the strength you taught us wasn't corruption but evolution. Tom Riley, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke up. You came all this way based on lessons you learned as children? You saved our lives, David replied simply. More than that, you gave us the tools to save our own people from becoming something they weren't meant to be. When we learned that the Devourers were threatening Earth, there was never any question about what we would do. The strategic planning session that followed was unlike anything in military history. Human tactical expertise blended with Zephyrian combat experience. Guided by 5 individuals who understood both cultures intimately, they developed a battle plan that required absolute trust between species that had never fought as allies before. The timing has to be perfect, Elena explained, running final calculations. Human ships create the initial disruption pattern while Zephyrian vessels amplify and focus it. If either group fails, the entire plan collapses. And if it works? Sarah asked. If it works, Marcus replied. We don't just save Earth. We save every world the Devourers have targeted. This frequency disruption will spread through their quantum communication network, affecting their entire fleet across multiple star systems. As the briefing concluded and preparation began for the most important battle in galactic history, Sarah realized that the 5 frightened cubs she had rescued 8 years ago had not only survived but had become the bridge between 2 species. They had taken the best of both worlds and forged something entirely new. The children she had raised with love had grown into leaders who would save not just her species, but countless others across the galaxy. The Bobcat had indeed raised the cubs well, and now they were returning to protect their adoptive pack in humanity's darkest hour. The next 4 hours transformed Luna Station into the most chaotic and organized command center in human history. 2 species that had never fought together were preparing to execute a battle plan that defied every conventional military doctrine ever written. Sarah watched through the observation deck as human and Zephyrian engineers worked side by side. Their different approaches to problem-solving, creating solutions neither could have achieved alone. Dr. Vasquez and Elena had taken over the main science lab, their collaboration producing modifications to weapon systems that seemed impossible just hours earlier. The frequency generators are ready, Elena reported. Her scientific excitement barely contained despite the desperate circumstances. David's modifications to your quantum transmitters have created resonance patterns that should disrupt Devourer neural networks across their entire fleet. Tom Riley looked up from a bank of modified engines, his hair disheveled from hours of intensive work. I've never seen engineering like this, he admitted. David's approach to energy flow is completely different from human methods, but somehow more efficient. We're getting output levels I thought were impossible. The collaboration extended beyond technical aspects. In the tactical center, Alex and Adrian were working with Morrison to coordinate fleet movements that would require split-second timing between species with entirely different communication protocols and fighting styles. Human ships respond to digital commands and execute plans through hierarchical structures, Alex explained, manipulating a three-dimensional battle display. Zephyrian vessels operate through pack intuition and shared consciousness during combat. The challenge is synchronizing both approaches, Adrian continued, highlighting critical timing sequences. But Marcus has been teaching our pilots human-style precision, while your pilots learn to trust pack instincts. Sarah observed the pilot training sessions through the station's monitors. Human pilots sat in Zephyrian cockpits learning to feel the rhythm of pack coordination. Zephyrian warriors practiced with human navigation systems, adapting their natural reflexes to digital precision. The learning curve was steep, but the results were remarkable. "It's working," Morrison reported with amazement. "Mixed crews are performing maneuvers that neither species could execute independently. The Zephyrians provide reflexes and intuition, while humans provide tactical precision and analytical thinking." Marcus appeared at Sarah's side, his presence as comforting as it had been when he was a child seeking guidance. "You're worried about something specific," he observed, his enhanced senses detecting the subtle signs of her emotional state. "The plan requires absolute trust," Sarah replied. "If either fleet hesitates or fails to execute their part perfectly, everyone dies." "Humans have never worked with aliens in combat before. What if we can't overcome thousands of years of species barriers in a few hours? Then we fail," Marcus said simply. "But Captain Sarah, you taught me something important when I was young. You said that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite the fear. Our people are afraid too, but they're here because they believe in the lessons you taught us." Through the viewport, they could see the combined fleet forming up in battle positions. 237 human vessels worked alongside 12 massive Zephyrian battle cruisers and their escort craft. The formation looked chaotic to human eyes, lacking the rigid geometric patterns typically favored by military strategists. "It looks like a hunting pack," Sarah observed. "Because it is," Marcus replied with satisfaction. "Your ships provide the precision strikes while ours provide the instinctive coordination. Together we become something the Devourers have never faced before, a truly cooperative multi-species force." The final briefing brought together commanders from both fleets. Sarah found herself looking at a room filled with humans and Zephyrians, working together as if they had been allies for generations rather than strangers who had met hours earlier. Final sensor readings show the Devourer fleet will reach engagement range in 90 minutes, reported Commander Theklar, a Zephyrian warrior who had embraced Marcus's philosophy of cooperation. Their formation suggests they expect to face traditional defensive strategies, which works in our favor, Elena added, calling up biological scan data. They've adapted their defenses based on previous encounters with single-species forces. They're not prepared for coordinated attacks that combine different technological and tactical approaches. The battle plan was complex but elegant. Phase 1 would involve human ships creating initial disruption patterns using modified quantum transmitters. Phase 2 required Zephyrian vessels to amplify and focus these patterns using their organic communication systems. Phase 3 would coordinate simultaneous strikes from both fleets at the moment when Devourer defenses were most vulnerable. "Remember," David addressed the assembled commanders, "the frequency disruption must be maintained for exactly 17 minutes and 34 seconds. Any longer and the Devourers will adapt. Any shorter, and the effect won't cascade through their entire fleet network." "What about casualties?" asked Captain Williams of the destroyer Phoenix. The question hung heavy in the air. Everyone knew that even with their innovative strategy, losses would be significant. The Devourers had destroyed entire civilizations. They wouldn't be defeated without sacrifice. "We expect to lose at least 60% of our vessels," Marcus replied honestly. "But if we succeed, we save not just Earth but every world in this sector. The choice is whether those sacrifices save millions of lives or merely delay the inevitable." Sarah watched the faces around the room, human and Zephyrian alike, processing the reality of their situation. These people were preparing to die for the chance to save species they had never met on worlds they had never seen. It was exactly the kind of sacrifice she had tried to teach 5 alien children about years earlier. "There's something else," Elena said quietly. "The frequency disruption will affect Zephyrian neural systems as well. Our enhanced senses and pack communication abilities will be severely impaired during the battle. We'll be fighting deaf and blind, Teklar acknowledged, relying entirely on human guidance and our own training. And human ships will be operating beyond their normal parameters, Tom added. The modified systems are untested under combat conditions. We might lose power or navigation at critical moments. The risks were staggering. Both fleets would be operating with significant handicaps depending entirely on their ability to trust and support each other. It was a level of cooperation that had never been attempted between alien species, let alone during a battle for survival. Any questions? Sarah asked. A young Zephyrian pilot raised her hand. Admiral Chen, may I ask you something? Of course. Marcus and the others have told us stories about their time with your people, about how you taught them that family isn't about biology, but about choice and commitment. Is that really what humans believe? Sarah looked around the room at faces both human and alien, all united by a common purpose. That's what the best of us believe, she replied. And apparently it's what the best of you believe too. The pilot nodded solemnly. Then we are family and family protects family. The simple statement resonated through the room like a declaration of war against despair itself. These weren't just military allies preparing for battle. They were individuals who had chosen to become something greater than the sum of their parts. As the commanders dispersed to their ships, Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder. Marcus stood beside her, no longer the frightened cub she had once comforted, but still her child in all the ways that mattered. Thank you, he said simply. For what? For teaching us that courage comes from love, not hate. That strength comes from protecting others, not dominating them. That the best victories are the ones where everyone survives. He paused, violet eyes bright with determination. We're going to save your people, Captain Sarah. All of them. As the fleet moved into final position, Sarah realized that the 5 cubs she had rescued from a dying world had indeed grown into magnificent adults, but more importantly, they had become teachers themselves, spreading the lessons of compassion and cooperation to an entire generation of their people. The battle for Earth was about to begin, and humanity's fate rested in the hands of children she had raised with love. The Devourer fleet emerged from hyperspace like a nightmare made manifest. Hundreds of biomechanical ships, each one capable of consuming a small moon, arranged themselves in perfect predatory formation. Their hulls pulsed with organic rhythms while mechanical weapon systems tracked potential targets with terrifying precision. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the command vessel New Meridian, watching the enemy approach with a mixture of fear and determination. Beside her, Marcus coordinated with the Zephyrian fleet through the pack communication network that would soon be severed by their own weapons. All ships report ready, Morrison announced from the tactical station. Human vessels are in disruption formation Alpha. Zephyrian battle groups are positioned for amplification pattern Omega. Enemy is beginning preliminary scans, Dr. Vasquez reported from the science station. They're analyzing our formation and preparing counter-strategies based on previous encounters with defensive fleets. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that the next few minutes would determine the fate of countless worlds. All ships, this is Admiral Chen, you know what's at stake. You know what you're fighting for. Human and Zephyrian, we stand together. Execute Phase 1. Across the human fleet, modified quantum transmitters activated simultaneously. The invisible frequencies they broadcast would have been meaningless to conventional weapons, but Elena's research had identified them as the exact resonance needed to disrupt Devourer neural networks. Disruption pattern established, Tom Riley reported from engineering. Frequency generators are holding steady at optimal parameters. On the Zephyrian vessels, organic communication systems that had evolved for pack coordination began amplifying and focusing the human-generated frequencies. The combination created a harmony that neither species could have produced alone. Phase 2 initiated, Marcus reported, though his voice already showed the strain of the frequency disruption affecting his own neural systems. Zephyrian vessels are maintaining amplification despite sensory impairment. The first signs of success appeared on the enemy ships. Biomechanical interfaces began flickering as organic and mechanical components lost their synchronized communication. Devourer vessels, which normally moved with perfect coordination, began showing signs of confusion and disorganization. It's working, Elena announced, monitoring the biological readings from her modified scanner. Devourer neural networks are experiencing cascade failures. Their adaptive capabilities are being compromised. But the enemy wasn't defenseless. Even with their communication networks disrupted, the Devourers retained enough coordination to begin a counterattack. Massive energy weapons lanced out toward the combined fleet, forcing evasive maneuvers that tested the unprecedented cooperation between species. Human vessel Columbia is taking heavy damage, Morrison reported. They're requesting assistance. Without hesitation, the Zephyrian cruiser Blood Talon moved to intercept, using its superior armor to shield the damaged human ship. The action would have been unthinkable months earlier, but now it seemed as natural as breathing. Zephyrian Squadron 3 is under concentrated fire, Marcus announced, his enhanced hearing picking up distress calls despite the neural disruption. They need covering fire. Human destroyers Phoenix and Intrepid immediately responded, their precise targeting systems picking off Devourer escort vessels that were harassing the larger Zephyrian ships. The cooperation was seamless, as if the two species had been fighting together for centuries. 17 minutes until frequency cascade completion, David announced from his position coordinating the technical aspects of the battle. All ships must maintain formation for full effect. The battle intensified as the Devourers realized their normal adaptive strategies weren't working. They began employing increasingly desperate tactics, sacrificing smaller vessels to protect their massive capital ships. But the combined fleet matched every move with coordinated responses that confused and overwhelmed the enemy. They're trying to adapt to our frequency pattern, Elena warned, monitoring the biological readings. Some of their ships are beginning to compensate for the neural disruption. Phase 3, Sarah commanded. All ships execute synchronized assault pattern. This is our chance. The final phase required perfect timing between two different tactical philosophies. Human ships provided precision strikes against specific target points, while Zephyrian vessels used their superior firepower to exploit the vulnerabilities. The coordination was beautiful and deadly, like watching a symphony of destruction performed by musicians who had learned each other's music. Direct hit on Devourer command vessel, Morrison reported with excitement. Their primary coordination node is offline. Secondary command ships are compensating, Alex observed from his tactical position. But their response time is delayed due to the neural disruption. The tide of battle was turning. For the first time in galactic history, the Devourers were not just being resisted but actively defeated. Their perfect biomechanical integration had become a weakness when faced with an attack that exploited the interface between organic and artificial components. Frequency cascade is complete, David announced. The disruption pattern is spreading through their quantum communication network to every Devourer ship in this sector. Across space, Devourer vessels throughout multiple star systems began experiencing the same neural network failures. Ships that had been consuming the Proxima colonies suddenly found their coordination shattered. Fleets attacking the Vegan system lost their adaptive capabilities. The effect was spreading faster than the Devourers could compensate. Multiple enemy vessels are withdrawing, Morrison reported with amazement. They're retreating from engagement zones across the entire sector. But victory came with a price. The battle had cost 63 human vessels and 4 Zephyrian cruisers. Thousands of brave individuals had given their lives to save billions more. Yet as Sarah watched the surviving Devourer ships fleeing in disarray, she knew their sacrifice had achieved something unprecedented. All ships. This is Admiral Chen, she announced over the fleet-wide communication network. The Devourer threat to this sector has been eliminated. But more importantly, today, we proved that cooperation between species isn't just possible, it's unstoppable. The celebration that followed was unlike anything in recorded history. Human and Zephyrian crews worked together to rescue survivors, repair damaged vessels, and coordinate relief efforts for the worlds that had been attacked. The boundaries between species seemed to dissolve in the face of shared victory and mutual respect. But for Sarah, the most meaningful moment came when Marcus appeared on her bridge. No longer the commanding fleet commander, but simply the child she had raised returning home. "We did it, Captain Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We saved them all." "No," Sarah replied, pulling him into an embrace that defied military protocol and species barriers alike. "You did it. You and Elena and Alex and Adrian and David, you took the lessons we taught you and made them into something greater than we ever imagined." Dr. Vasquez joined them, Followed by Morrison and Tom Riley, the original crew of the Meridian stood together with the 5 aliens they had raised, surrounded by the evidence that love and compassion could indeed change the galaxy. What happens now? Helena asked, her scientific mind already looking toward the future. Now we rebuild, Sarah replied, but this time we do it together, human and Zephyrian, working as partners to create something better than either species could achieve alone. In the months that followed, the victory over the Devourers became the foundation for an unprecedented alliance. The cooperation that had been forged in battle expanded into scientific collaboration, cultural exchange, and mutual exploration of the galaxy. Other species, inspired by the example, began forming their own partnerships. Marcus and his 4 companions became ambassadors of a new philosophy that spread throughout civilized space. They taught the lessons they had learned aboard the Meridian, that family is defined by choice and commitment, that strength comes from protecting others, and that the greatest victories are achieved through cooperation rather than domination. Years later, when historians studied the turning point that transformed galactic civilization, they would note that it began with a simple act of compassion. A human captain who chose to rescue 5 alien children, not because of any political or military advantage, but simply because it was the right thing to do. The Bobcat had indeed raised the cubs well, and when the time came, they had returned to save not just their adoptive pack but the entire galaxy. Love had triumphed over fear, cooperation over conflict, and compassion over conquest. In the end, the greatest lesson was the simplest one, that kindness to others, regardless of their species or origin, creates bonds stronger than any weapon and more valuable than any treasure. The 5 Zephyrian cubs who had been saved by human compassion grew up to save the galaxy with the very lessons their adoptive family had taught them. And across the stars, countless worlds continued to exist because a tired exploration captain had once looked into 5 pairs of violet eyes and decided that all children, regardless of species, deserved a chance to grow up surrounded by love.